All right, everybody. Well, I'm so glad you're here. We are going to talk about the hard stuff today, the dark stuff. The next couple weeks, we're going to spend some time talking about sin, and that sin is actually darker than we know. Sin is what the word Christians use to describe when something is broken in creation. Sin is what we say when we need to describe when an offense has taken place, when we've hurt one another, human to human. So we take sin very seriously. And as I was thinking about some of the young families here, I think about you raising your children, and there's that question that sometimes doesn't get spoken, but you're like, how are we going to explain these tough, dark things to our children, right? I had a buddy, he's up in Milwaukee this past fall, and he gets a panicked call from his wife while he's teaching, so he can't really leave work, and she goes, "There's a dead bird on the driveway. I need you to come home right away and get rid of it so that our 3-year-old daughter doesn't start asking about death," right? And he literally had to take some vacation over his lunchtime to come and shovel this bird off the driveway, put it away, and it's funny because as much as he tried to protect his daughter from this idea of death, we know that even children sense that something is wrong. Even children can sense that there's something broken and wrong going on here. They know, and sometimes they say it as, things are sad sometimes, right? And when things are sad, sometimes we hold to a promise that, everything sad will one day come untrue, right? That's what Jesus is going to do for us. But sin is a big problem. It has to be dealt with. It's not just something that's fine or okay. I have been trying to use, and this has gotten me in a little bit of trouble once in a while, the words, "I forgive you," a bit more. And that kind of language is normal here in a church setting, but not at the grocery store. And so I was coming into a grocery store and the door opened, but someone was in the way with their cart, and they kind of blocked my way and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I said, "I forgive you." And immediately what happens when you say, "I forgive you," is they're like, "Wait, did I do something wrong?" And I'm like, "Well, you said sorry, right?" It's a startling word. When you have to say, "I forgive you," it means there's some offense, there's something darker, there's something heavier at play. And maybe in your home you're thinking, well, sometimes when I say I'm sorry, we have to just say it's fine, or it's okay. But I don't think sin is fine. I don't think it's okay. I think it has to be forgiven. It takes some kind of weight, and what we believe is that Jesus actually takes it very seriously too. He takes it so seriously that it's actually going to cost him his life. It's going to cost him bloodshed. It's going to cost a lot to get rid and forgive sin. So we're going to talk about sin in certain ways these next couple weeks, and what's going to happen is it's not going to be really as much the sin that's out there as the sin that's in here. Sin is something to which we are captive. It's much darker than you actually know. So we're going to have different kind of themes week to week, and one of them is going to be sin as idolatry, the idea of having other gods, sin as lawlessness, sin as falling short of the mark. We're going to have sin as adultery. We're not going to tell you what week that is. You're going to be surprised. And then sin as rebellion. Today we talk about sin as rebellion. Rebels, rebellion. All right, so to rebel, there needs to be some conditions, right? To rebel, there needs to be something to rebel against. There needs to be a relationship, or maybe some boundaries, right? There needs to be boundaries into which you are enclosed and have agreed to stay in, or maybe they've been placed on you, and then you rebel against those walls, those boundaries. Now, the problem is that boundaries are actually a really good thing, are they not? Boundaries. Let's think about this. You're thinking about boundaries. Where are they good? Boundaries are good in relationships, right? Here's how I like to be loved, right? Here is something you cannot do to me. That is inappropriate, right? There's boundaries in relationships. There's boundaries you have with schoolwork. At some point during the weekend, you gotta cut it off, right? You gotta say, I gotta stop working. There's boundaries at work that you set. That's not in my job description, right? You tell your boss that. I'm gonna practice that one. That's gonna be fun for my senior pastor. I'm gonna write the job description. There are boundaries in, all right, nobody raise your hands. I'm just gonna watch your eyes. There are boundaries you need to have with in-laws, right? Where are you going for the holidays? There's boundaries you have with family. No, boundaries are actually good things that actually lead to thriving, flourishing, and loving relationships. And if you think boundaries are a good thing, and I know you do, I have to say that God has boundaries. It's a good thing, right? You don't get to decide all of a sudden that God's boundaries are out of bounds just because they're not yours, right? God has boundaries that he set up from the beginning of creation. It's actually all over in kind of this poetic way of God describing how he creates out of nothing with his word. And he sets boundaries between light and dark. That's important so we can see. He creates boundaries between water and sky, right? Water and sky, so then if you were a human, you'd just be treading water, right? But don't worry, there's more boundaries to be made. There's land and water boundaries. That's good, right? So you don't have to just tread water and swim in this world. There's boundaries when he creates plants. Plants have seeds that help them grow and reproduce, and plants are also not humans, right? We eat them. We don't eat humans, right? And then there's there's animals and humans. And there's a boundary there. And the reason there's boundaries is because God set up the world to work a certain way. See, because God gave us everything he created, and then he said, it's yours. Take care of it. I've made everything so that I can take care of you. And you know what? God, when he creates, he takes such joy in what he created. Every time he creates, he says it was good, but then he gets to creating humans, and he's like, no, not just good, very good. It's very good what he has created. But there's boundaries in which to live. Well, you heard the story, and it was odd, but there's going to come a time where there's rebellion, there's pushing of the boundaries. But I want to share something I've picked up, maybe the language of rebellion. And I've been trying to think through my own life in rebellion and think through what I've seen around me as language of rebellion. So the first language around rebellion that I have is really for children, like young children, and it's no, right? Does anybody have a child who's in the no stage? Are you getting out of it? Are you stuck in it? Travis, what are you saying? Yeah? No? Judas? No. Right? Somehow, like, you can just be like, do you want food and do you want good things? And still, no. Right? We have a play space here on Tuesday mornings, and I think there's like this new generation of parent that wants to give children autonomy and let them make choices for themselves. That isn't still you're like dragging a child, and he's saying, no, I don't want to go, and the parent's like, too bad, I know what's best for you, right? I'm not a parent, and so sometimes when I see a child on like a backpack with a leash, I'm like, how could they? And then like parents are like, yeah, no, put them on a leash. Children can be rebellious. Then I was thinking of teenagers, and you know what, I'm not even going to say teenagers because I'm still probably in this phase of the like, I know better, right? You find out who your parents voted for last election, and you go, well, I know better, right? You find out things even as a middle schooler, a high schooler, and you find ways to rebel. Your parents still want what's best for you, but you want to do your own thing, and you just say, I know better. The other language of rebellion I'm picking up on is really when you kind of just ignore this whole story of God. When you ignore all that God has given you, and he's given everything, and you just say, you know what, it's not enough. And so your language of rebellion is it doesn't matter anyways. It just doesn't matter. And with it doesn't matter comes, why restrict yourself at all? Why have boundaries? Why listen to an oppressive God, right? You let rebellion go far enough, and all of a sudden rebellion isn't your problem, it's God's problem. Interesting how that works. But he'll take care of it. He'll take care of it. But it actually happens that there was a serpent, really Satan, and he was crafty in the garden, and he carried this language of rebellion. He was working with Eve, and Adam was most likely watching off to the side. He was there the whole time. This is really more Adam's problem than even Eve's. It's the man's fault. And it says, he asked, did God actually say? Right? He's kind of questioning the character of God. God gave you everything, but did he actually say that you weren't supposed to have this one last thing? That within the boundaries there would even still be another boundary? And so he says, did God actually say? And it leads Eve to maybe come to the conclusion, well, no, maybe he didn't say that. But as it continues, Satan actually says again, you know this sin stuff that you're kind of working on, these boundaries? If you cross it, you're not going to surely die, right? You won't die. I know better, right? Now, there's something so funny about that word, I know better, when you live a rebellious life. Sometimes in the church, you end up with people who have lived like hell, they've lived their rebellious lives, and then they have a come to Jesus moment. And when you hear those stories, you're like, that's so cool, because my story's so boring. But do you know what those people who lived like hell usually say? I wouldn't wish my life on anybody, right? The pain I went through, all of the hardship, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And yet somehow we need to explore the boundaries for ourselves, right? I know better. Well, at some point these questions wear at Eve, they also wear on Adam, and actually it says Eve takes what God set a boundary around that Eve was not to have. Eve takes it. She eats it. Does it matter? Does it actually really matter? There's rebellion. See, what happens then is the decision. You kind of read this story and you wonder, is this God punishing them? And as I thought about this question, it kind of hits me that it's not as much punishment as it is just consequences. It's consequences of crossing the boundary that we weren't meant to cross. It's consequences that we decided to overstep our role, right? We decided that we would be God, and everything that God gave us, it just wasn't enough. And so, no, I know better, and it doesn't really matter, but now I call the shots for myself. Well, turns out that God actually sets another boundary. And it causes quite a bit of pain. It's pain because, well, sometimes the most painful part about sin is actually getting what you want. And so Adam and Eve want to be their own gods. They want to do their own thing. They want to live outside the boundaries. And so God says, you're out of the garden. You're outside of the boundary. I'm putting you away. The consequence is that your relationships, which were meant to be so beautiful and care for you and loving, they're broken and they're going to be painful. All you had to do was take everything I gave to you, but now you're going to have to work for it. And you know that it's painful to live outside those boundaries as well, because that's where we live right now. So the question then is, how does God deal with rebellion? How does God deal with rebellion? In the Genesis account, very quickly, even amidst all these consequences that Adam and Eve are suffering, he makes a promise. He says that he's going to send one who's going to crush Satan, crush the serpent, but it's going to cause pain for the one who crushes. The heel is going to be bitten. But it says that God deals with rebellion. How do you think he deals with rebellion? So my buddy Mark was here 2 weeks ago with us, and I'll be honest, we send stuff back and forth, and he sent me something he was sharing, and it was so good into what I think how God deals with rebellion. There's this part of Scripture in Matthew 11, and listen to it. Here's what he says. Jesus says these words, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." How does God deal with rebellion? It seems that he steps into it with us. It seems that God doesn't leave us to our rebellious ways, but actually steps into our world in the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus is described this way: he became sin who knew no sin. Jesus yokes himself to us. He's connected. He refuses to be separated. Even when we've broken the boundary, he goes out, finds you, brings you back for himself. And he uses this term of a yoke. It's like a farming kind of thing, right? I'm not a farmer, but a yoke is what's used to get work done in a field. It's kind of like a bar with two kind of metal rings, which two oxen would put their head through. And then the two oxen would work in tandem. Now the problem is that if you're a young oxen or untrained to do this kind of labor with the yoke with another person, you need to put a trained oxen alongside on the other side of the yoke, so that when the younger oxen who doesn't know the way to go and is rebellious pushes and tries to find its own way, the one who knows the way drags them back and is connected to them. See, for the longest time, I thought this whole yoke language was just about my anxiety and the fears I had, and then all of a sudden I thought about, what if this is how God deals with my rebellion? That he connects himself to us and refuses to let you go. Even when you try to drag him, he'll actually go with you. He ties himself to you. Even when you have the yoke of Jesus upon you and you try to go outside of the boundary of where you're supposed to go. There's an old-timey word for sin, and I shouldn't say old-timey because it might offend some of you, but in the Lord's Prayer, instead of "forgive us our sin as we forgive those who sin against us," it says these words, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And I actually grew up with those words, and for the longest time I said, why don't we just say sin? Why don't we just call it like it is? Are we trying to avoid the word sin? But it just struck me that this word trespass works so well when it comes to our rebellion. See, to trespass, where have you seen that in culture? You've seen it as no trespassing, right? Don't go there. Don't go that direction. See, to trespass is to step over a boundary and to go somewhere you don't belong. To trespass is to sin. To trespass is to step over a boundary and go somewhere that you're not meant to be. Now, if you're starting to think of this trespass word, all of a sudden, I start to think of what it means to trespass. To go where you're not meant to go. Can you think about a time in your life when you've trespassed? You're on a computer and you open a browser, and then you hit a certain setting on the browser, and then you trespass. Every step of the way you make that decision to trespass, to jump over the boundary. It's progressive choices to go where you are not meant to go. You're in a relationship and, well, there's steps to go, right? It wasn't meant to go that way, but trespass after trespass. Something good that God meant for you is all of a sudden become pain, disillusionment. and you're not sure what it means to be loved at all. To trespass is to step over a boundary. I have some good news and I have some bad news. Jesus is yoked to you. He goes with you when you trespass. He's with you when you trespass. Because you believe in Jesus and your life is tied to him. And now all of a sudden when you go to these places you're not supposed to go, Jesus goes with you. It's almost scary, right? But here's the good news. He rescues you out of stepping out of the boundary. Instead, Jesus himself, not you, will be crushed. He'll take your sin onto his body, and he'll put it in the ground, buried it, gone, sin, gone away from you forever, so that spiritually you are alive, but somehow you might still experience the consequences. But your Jesus is yoked to you. He will not leave. You know, boundaries are like a thing that are really important for a younger generation. I hear people talk about boundaries all the time, and maybe this is what makes the gospel so screwballs, is that there's no boundaries to Jesus. He has no boundaries. He actually knows your rebellion, he knows what you do, he knows where you're going, and yet he still loves you and refuses to give up on you. It's the story you get all the way through the Old Testament, a rebellious people and a God who just loves them in spite of themselves. He goes with you and refuses to give up on you. See, a part of me thinks that maybe if it was my choice, we would stop doing confession and forgiveness for a moment. Maybe it's just getting too simple for you. I know that when you step into a time of confession, and I do this too, you're supposed to think of something you've done wrong, so you pick that pet sin, and then you come with it every single week, right? The beauty of it is that it still gets forgiven. It's not actually about you doing the right thing, it's about what Jesus has done for you. And so we're going to repeat confession, absolution, forgiveness, the Lord's Supper. We're going to keep doing it, because it's not up to me. It's up to the Jesus who never gives up on you. And so Jesus ties your life to his life to yours. And it's good news for us rebellious people. Amen.